Hi, I'm Tria Case, and welcome to a special episode of Sustainability Matters. While Earth Day may be just one day on the calendar, the urgency of climate action is year round. That's why we're excited to share this inspiring conversation recorded at the CUNY Graduate Center as part of the 10th anniversary of the Futures Initiative. The Futures Initiative is a CUNY based program that advances equity and innovation in higher education through collaborative, interdisciplinary learning and public engagement. To mark its 10th year milestone, the program chose to highlight Earth Day with a public dialogue on the future of the planet. This panel explores one of the most urgent and universal themes of our time, water, its crisis, its stories, and its role in building a more just and sustainable world. Enjoy this compelling conversation through the lens of four unique perspectives on water, spanning science, education, activism, and community action.
I am really excited not only to welcome you here, but to welcome you and introduce our moderator for today's event, The Future of the Planet. Dr. Enriquez just defended her dissertation. She is one of the newest PhDs coming out of the CUNY Graduate Center, and she is also a Futures Initiative Fellow. So congratulations, Megan. We are very proud of you.
So I just wanted to start off by showing my immense gratitude for the education that I've received at the Graduate Center and all of the support that I've received through the Futures Initiative. And so to begin our conversation, I just wanted to mention that, with over 70% of Earth's surface being covered in water, it's no surprise that we call our home the blue planet. From the deepest oceanic trenches to the smallest puddles of rainwater on the sidewalk, water sustains a diversity of life, including our own. The oceans and seas produce around 80% of the world's oxygen, in addition to regulating global temperatures and absorbing up to 30% of the carbon dioxide that we humans produce each year. This carbon dioxide, along with numerous other human-induced impacts, are changing the climate, raising global temperatures and sea levels, and causing unpredictable and catastrophic weather patterns across the globe. For example, millions of people across southern Africa are suffering from a historic drought, which is triggering one of the worst food crises we've seen in our lifetimes. Wildfires in California and Canada are destroying thousands of acres of forest, and I'm sure we can all remember those super smoky days that we were experiencing here last summer in New York. In other parts of the world, hurricanes, monsoons, and tropical storms are wiping away entire communities and threatening to displace millions of people. Those living in coastal communities and island nations, places like India, Thailand, the Maldives, the Bahamas, all of these communities are at risk as sea levels continue to rise. Here at home, we only have to think of local storms, Hurricane Sandy, which happened here in New York, Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, and Hurricane Katrina in Louisiana. Despite there being too little water in some places and too much water in others, only 1% of the water on Earth is drinkable. And while you may expect that having access to clean water, drinkable water, is an inherent human right, we don't even have to look much further than places like Flint, Michigan, to see that access to clean, drinkable, healthy water on a consistent basis is not a given right. There are many communities across the globe that don't have reliable and consistent access to this resource. And so, with water being such an important part of our lives, flowing through and touching so many different aspects, I really wanted to emphasize, and today we wanted to focus our conversation on this vital resource. And we have four amazing guests who are going to come at the issues of water and issues surrounding water from a number of different angles. First, we have Dr. David Gruber. He is a marine biologist, a National Geographic explorer, the founder and president of Project SETI, the Cetacean Translation Initiative, a distinguished professor of biology and environmental sciences at Baruch and the CUNY Graduate Center. His interdisciplinary research bridges animal communication, climate science, marine biology, microbiology, molecular biology, a whole bunch of really interesting stuff. And his inventions include technology to perceive the underwater world. For example, the shark eye camera, which allows us humans to see the underwater world in a way that a shark would. Dr. Gruber's research has led to the discoveries of the first bioluminescent sea turtle and numerous other species of biofluorescent and bioluminescent. Next, we have Kyra Beitel. She is a science communicator. She's an up-and-coming social media powerhouse, and she's an environmental studies student at Hunter College. Being of Trinidadian heritage, she has a particular interest in the impact of changing climate on small island developing states. Most recently, she's been interning with the Urban Climate Change Research Network and working with CUNY TV as the host of their Eco Brief show on sustainability matters. Next, we have Mauricio Gonzalez, who is a marine science research instructor with the New York Harbor School. While in his native Colombia, he pursued a degree in marine biology and wrote his thesis on the coral reefs of Tayrona National Park. He lived among local fishermen and conducted workshops with them. He even actively defended sea turtles from poachers. After realizing that his true calling was in environmental education, he moved back to New York City and founded the Marine Biology Research Program and civic service team, the New York Harbor SEALs. The Harbor SEALs monitor and study the Hudson River estuary and have conducted studies looking at marine debris, microplastics, plankton, osprey, and many other things. He currently teaches oceanography and marine biology at the Harbor School, in addition to directing the Marine Biology Research Program. So welcome, Mauricio. And last, but definitely not least, we have Dr. Abigail Perez Aguilera, who's an assistant professor and chair of environmental policy and sustainability management at the New School. Her research focuses on land body entanglements and decolonial approaches to critical geographies. She has spoken on numerous panels about decolonial feminisms, radical imaginations, and environmental justice. In addition to her research, Dr. Perez Aguilera teaches courses on water ecologies and social justice, toxicity, ecology, and health, and ecofeminism and social justice at the New School. Her book project is titled Radical Imaginations Beyond the Anthropocene. Thank you for being here today. And so I thought I'd kick this party off with a very broad and general question. What does water mean to you? How do themes around water intersect with your work, your passions, and your lives in general? And I'll come and take a seat with you. Kyra, would you like to kick it off?
For me in particular, I'm a Florida native, and living in Florida, you very much get to know how water can be our greatest blessing, but also kind of a curse. But by that, I mean, living through hurricanes makes you realize how much there is no such thing as a natural disaster. There's simply the interaction of natural phenomenon with the built environment. And bringing that knowledge into my life as a student at Hunter College in the environmental studies program, I have imagined water as something that needs to not be taken for granted. How we manage it, how we move forward in our appreciation of it, but also our respect of it as something that has the potential to give us life, but also radically alter how we live our lives is very important. And for me, it's crucial to communicate and elevate the stories of people living on small island developing states and in coastal communities, because those people having such high coast to land ratios will experience the brunt of water impacts the most. And they also, as we know, have had the least to do with, in a lot of cases, the intensification of these problems. So it's very inspiring to me as someone who grew up around water, who loves water, but also can see the immense power it has to transform lives.
That's really cool that you have such a personal connection to it through your family history and through your current work as well. Dr. Gruber, your work is, as a marine biologist, completely around marine environments and water. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with water and how it affects your work?
I mean, water is such a kind of all-encompassing thing. I mean, we're a huge percent of our body is water. There's entire like groups of sea life, like jellyfish, that are 95% water. When we look for outside of our solar system, when we're looking for like, is there habitable life somewhere else? The first thing we're looking for is there water. I think it's like it's something's just so beautiful. It's like a universal solute. Like anything could dissolve in it. It could come in different states. It could be in a gaseous form. It could be in a solid. It could be a liquid. It's like we're little oceans that are flowing inside of our bodies. So I mean, it's this thing that interconnects us all, and it's also a thing of mystery. Like there's still open questions of like, where did the water in the ocean come from? You know, and like, so it's just, for me, I also resonate with it could be a thing that could destroy lives. It's something that we should fear, we should revere, we should respect. It's basically something we couldn't live without, and it forms the fabric and connectivity between every living thing on Earth.
Yeah, and that's a really cool way to think about it, little oceans within ourselves. Dr. Perez Aguilera, would you like to share?
I'm from Mexico City, but maybe you don't know, it's sinking because it was an interconnected lakes. So that was my first approach. I used to live in an area that was prone to flooding. So I see the destructive part of it. And the question remained, at least for me, moving on into my studies and just moving on in life, how water is mediated through environmental politics, right? It is not only that flood happened, just someone decided to happen. It was mediated to like really bad infrastructure. It was really mediated to really bad urban planning, and among other things. And of course, as David was saying, like it is also mediated to beautiful stuff like community engagement and embodiment of the beauty around water rituals, for example.
And Mauricio, speaking about community engagement, you work with local communities here in New York to study the water that's around us every day. Can you speak a little bit to your experience with water?
Sure. So as a teacher and teaching evolution as part of what my course is about, I think of how when organisms evolved in the ocean, one of the main things they had to do was evolutionarily figure out how to incorporate water into their bodies. And so as organisms move on to land, they kind of bring the ocean with them through their circulatory system. And it's critical. So water is life. And so one of the first things I do as a teacher when I take my students out to the water, I say, what do you see? And they all say, well, I see a nice shiny substance, the water, the surface of the water. And then I challenge them and I say, well, what else do you see? And then they say, well, we see the trees on the other side, we're New Jersey, and we see the Statue of Liberty. I was like, okay, well, how about under the water? What's under the water? What do you imagine is under the harbor? And they give me all kinds of stories, and I tell them, well, you know, there's marine organisms, a few of them. There's a lot of sand and a lot of debris, and there's also a lot of World War II tanks and debris, and there's also a lot of plastics and a lot of other contaminants that we've put in the water because water does a great job of hiding everything. And as land animals, we've forgotten what's underneath and we've forgotten what's inside of us. And to tie things together, right? The smallest things that we can imagine, like microplastics, the things that we can't see, or the heavy metals that we're dumping into the oceans, those things are making their way into our bodies at the moment. And a lot of it is through the water that we drink or the water that is added to the food that we drink. And so all these things, you know, water is life. And when we neglect the things that we cannot see, it comes back into us. And let's imagine what's there and let's keep it present and figure out how to do that.
Oh, really, really well said. And so I kind of wanted to ask a few specific questions now, and I guess we can start with Dr. Gruber. So your work as a National Geographic explorer has taken you across oceans vast and into remote areas, and that sounds like a really exciting and, ever-changing and dynamic experience to have. So what's one of your favorite memories or experiences that you've had while out on the ocean conducting research?
Well, it's like trying to say what's my favorite sibling or
Yeah, I could imagine.
the ocean is. I spent my whole life really studying the ocean and studying the animals in the ocean and trying to get at the perspective of marine creatures. I have had some times where just after a lot of patience, animals will slowly divulge something that hadn't been noticed before. So maybe I'll just talk about one or two examples of that. So one example was my work is about trying to see from the perspective of marine creatures. And so it's like, what does the world look like from the perspective of a shark? And in that sense, it's kind of like a long journey to understand how a shark sees the world, because I have to first understand the pigments in the eyes and the brain circuitry and like what wavelengths. And then when you drop under the water, all the other colors disappear. And that's why we have this blue ocean, because it's very spectrally different there. There was a species of shark called a swell shark that had fluorescent capabilities, and we didn't know what they meant. But once we looked at it through the perspective of the shark, we saw all these patterns emerge that showed, how they've been living for hundreds of millions of years and noticing things that us humans hadn't noticed. And I think that was like a really beautiful moment. And then another moment when I was actually just in the Solomon Islands and swimming at night and was looking for fluorescent, just looking at corals actually. And all of a sudden, this biofluorescent sea turtle like swam right in front of this apparatus that was meant to photograph fluorescent animals. And it was the first time it was seen. And it was just this beautiful moment of that kind of secret that this had been a part of sea turtles and a part of their lives. And as us humans, this is, we're just kind of learning these things about them. So feeling the kind of responsibility then to the turtle, now that we know this about them, and how could this information then benefit the marine life, and how could our deeper understanding of all this multitude of life lead to better protections and better connectivity. So anyway, those are two examples, but thank you.
Wow, that's such an eye-opening moment. I can only imagine how magical it must have felt seeing the biofluorescence for the first time, and how impactful that must have been. So that's really amazing, and thank you for sharing. Mauricio, your work with the harbor seals shows that you don't have to travel very far in order to engage and participate in meaningful, important, and very cool marine research. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the coolest things that you and the harbor seals have found here in New York?
So let me begin by saying that the reason why I came back to the United States after having studied in South America was because I also figured out that writing theses and was not enough for me. I needed to have a broader impact, and I felt that working with students would be the key to that impact. And so I started simple with measuring water quality in the Harlem River. And also doing hydroponics. 20 years ago, my middle school students were building hydroponic systems and understanding how plants don't need soil. You can just add the nutrients to the water. And so, but it began by studying the physical chemical parameters of the Harlem River. And then I went to the harbor school on Governor's Island, and we started to work with companies like eConcrete to see what kind of organisms are attracted to this type of concrete that has a lower pH and things like that. And we started to see that a lot of these materials attract a lot of what we call marine sessile invertebrates, which are the little bugs in the water, which are beautiful. And that's another myth that I've tried breaking with my students, to not care so much about the charismatic organisms or equally care for those other organisms that some of us might feel are not so important, but they're actually the base of the food web. And so figuring out how to bring back these ecosystems of invertebrates that form the backbone of our harbor, including oysters and ribbed mussels and sea squirts, which are these little organisms that actually have a heart, and they're invertebrates, and yeah, and see their heart beating when you look up close. My students have gone out to measure microplastics and compare them with plankton. Plankton is another organism that is the basis of the food web. I had a student who started planting seagrass again in Brooklyn for the first time, bring it back, and so many more projects that I think empower them to feel like they can make a difference.
And I think that hands-on experience is so integral to having students really feel ownership about their city, about the wild places that they live in, about the research that they're doing. And so I think really having those experiences will help inspire future generations of scientists, which, speaking of, we may have one right here, Kyra. So, with your work with Sustainability Matters, you have the power as on social media to inspire the future generation of scientists. Coming from a background that maybe wasn't super scientific in the beginning, what made you decide to go down this route? Science communication, sustainability communication.
So I originally started as a model like about 5 or 6 years ago. And one thing that modeling did is that it brought me right up close to the consumption machine, the industry of just excessive need, and experiencing that made me realize how integral storytelling was to the institution of telling us we need to define our identities and ourselves and who we are and how we appear in the world by what we consume. And that really impacted me because I saw just how manufactured it was and just how much resource went into generating these ideas that were basically false. They were just human created. And at the risk of sounding a little woo-woo, there's another piece to it that drove me here. I come from a very religious background, and I think there are two narratives that I was exposed to. One was just the beauty of creation and the majesty of the systems that make up the earth. But the other one was less exciting. It was this idea that, oh, it's all gonna burn anyways. We're headed to a new place that maybe doesn't involve the earth. And those three narratives that I was exposed to really impressed upon me this idea that storytelling and what we say about ourselves and what we say about the earth is so motivating to what people do. You can have people do things for others or against others by simply getting them involved in basically a religion of sorts. And I think that motivated me to think that in order to move forward as a new generation, solving the problem of our generation is by getting people to really buy into almost like an eco-religion, if you could call it that, where people see the lives of others, narratives are amplified, and we treat the planet and other people in ways that maybe from the past seem economically counter to what we're used to for the sake of each other. And that is, I think, more radical in implementation than it sounds. It might sound very optimistic and maybe powerless, but in reality, I think storytelling does have the power to get people to do things for others and to do things for themselves that are like incredibly critical to moving forward in a climate crisis situation.
Yeah. And with storytelling being such an important part of the human experience, it's definitely a topic that I want to circle back to in a little bit. But before we get there, Dr. Perez Aguilera, a lot of your work lies at the intersection of ecological and social justice. In your opinion, what are some of the most pressing issues today in relation to water justice? And then how does that kind of tie into broader questions of climate change and social change?
one of the reasons I was interested in water and its connection to environmental politics is that I was coming from a study of conflict. Like I was amazed for environmental conflict, and I was very interested in, for example, nuclear, like the waste and toxicity of nuclear power, etc. But at the end of the day, I had one student, and now he's a professor, and he asked me like, "Well, you're always telling me these bad stories and like these like scary stories, and I can't sleep. Like, do you have an answer? Like, do you have something like joyful?" And I said, like, that's true, because I told him like, "Oh, I listen to heavy metal when I am like preparing my classes, etc." And and they were like, "Yeah, but do you find joy in life?" Like, "Yeah, this is joy. Like, I want like it's." Because I wanted to try to explain them how studying environmental conflict is also to study resistance and community building, and the idea that someday the chains of these people they're going to be free. Someday freedom is going to be achieved. Someday we're going to find this type of communality, right? And going back to what you're saying, what are the pressing issues? I think water is just like you pick up in the Environmental Justice Atlas any conflict that involves water. It can be on fisheries, for example. It can be on poaching of turtle eggs. It can be in the form of Native American rights, for example. It can be in the form of many other things, including infrastructures that they are decaying, for example, in New York City, etc. All of those come to like they should have a commonality, and this one is the complexity of the issue, and second is that all are mediated by society and mediated by politics. I don't think there's one pressing issue on water, because if you ask me while I was in Chile, I can say like, oh, this is like talking about indigenous sovereignty, for example, for the Mapuche people. If you ask me when I was in Arizona, you can ask me about like water rights and together with Native American rights for the Tohono O'odham, for example. I think it all, like, of course, it is related to climate justice and climate change, but we have to see it on how it is not only something that's related to climate justice. It is related to many issues, like they are mediated to racial justice, they are mediated to classism, they are mediated to many things that there has to be like a type of like a situation, like case by case.
How do you think, our relationships with water are so deeply enmeshed with our entire existence, but we're entering a period now where our relationship with water is going to change. How do you foresee that happening? How do you picture the future of human-water relations moving forward? And I know that's kind of a broad question, and I wanted to keep it broad so that you each could come at it from, your own personal experiences, your own areas of expertise. But we're in changing times. Where do we think this ship's going? Kyra?
I was hoping to hear from you guys so I could sort of.
We'll jump in after.
Okay. I think I'll maybe not answer the question and leave it to them to get into the specifics, because I want to hear what you guys have to say. But one thing I did want to say was that I think it's very easy, well, it is very easy to picture disaster scenarios when it comes to the climate crisis, because we have so many movies and books and all kinds of things depicting disaster. But what's really important, which I hope you guys will illuminate, is to think about what happens in optimistic scenarios. If we get different tipping points right, if we move forward with the solutions that we have and we move towards implementing them. And I think that generating these stories, telling these stories, having not just utopias of, oh, if we get the climate crisis right, we'll be living in paradise. Not that kind of storytelling, but storytelling about like what's literally possible in our world is important to develop people's understanding of what the future might look like. And I think in particular, there is a movie called Waterworld that I watched recently that I think people have seen, and it does depict sort of the worst case scenario, and it has elements of gender violence, and it does sort of depict some of that potential. But I think when I watched it, I thought, oh, what if we had a narrative where it talked about maybe a new relationship to water, but in a situation where maybe we use less for our agriculture, we use less for our production of clothing, and we do get this right. And even in drought scenarios or instances of flooding, maybe we've implemented insurance policies and different government regulations that would help us move forward with that. So I think it might not sound as exciting as, oh, this dramatic world of water, but I think it is very key that people who are involved in storytelling take information that is real and is possible for the future and amplify that for the benefit of everybody.
No, for sure. And I definitely think keeping a realistic but positive and optimistic narrative going is important to get people involved and to engage people and actually motivate people to be the change that will lead to these sort of alternative futures.
Yeah, I'm reading a book called 19 Reservoirs that just came out, and you might want to take a look at it. It talks about the history of how New York City obtained its water, which is a very interesting story. That there's a lot of reservoirs upstate that were actually created by flooding farmland and flooding towns, and those reservoirs, in a sense, bypass a lot of cities and towns on their way down to New York City. I think that the folks who designed that obviously were thinking very long term, and I want to use that as like the jumping board to answering your question about like what's the future of water. And I think the future of water, because potable water is so scarce, and in a sense, we're contaminating it very quickly. I think folks are gonna have to realize that water is critical. And here in New York City, we are spoiled because of these reservoirs. Most of the rest of the world, they have alerts all the time of low reservoirs, and they have to ration their water and not use it the way we use it here. The first things you realize when you go somewhere else is, where am I gonna get a water bottle? Where like that's probably top 3 things that I'm thinking about when I go somewhere is, where can I get water? And where is that water coming from? How is it being filtered? A lot of people around the world, they drink contaminated water and their immune systems are super taxed, and they're always fighting off parasites and things, and they survive, they can do it, but there's gonna come a point where I think all of us are gonna have a reckoning with water, and we're gonna have to care for it with a lot of responsibility. I think it'll be a life and death situation for humanity. And so people, once we get to that point, it's okay, like we're gonna take care of this. Like we have to, there's no other choice.
I mean, I think it's such an interesting question because it makes me think of so many things. I mean, first I was like, where does this water come from? And I want to like look at the bottle and like see the source and see the mineral content. And then I think of water as like, in one sense, water as part of the hydrological cycle is renewable, right? Like right now there's water vapor coming out of my mouth due to the fact that I'm respiring and burning organic carbon. So there's water as in my breath. So it's more about, you mentioned in the beginning, about 1% of the water being more fresh water, and then of that, there's it gets to tiny little fractions, and it's this distribution of water where it becomes interesting and equitable. And I clearly see that as we kind of move water is something that should be free. Like water is not something that we should be charged for, and charged sometimes a lot. And I think we'll see in the future is like when water is scarce and when people kind of access to fresh water, that's like the kind of real pressure point where it's life or death. And that will lead to some real consequences. So I see that, but I also hear you with like the positive narratives. And honestly, the narratives, like I studied climate change for several decades, and I know so many details about carbon that I could bore you to death ad nauseum about every little facet of CO2 and the cycling and like how the levels have changed. And, but it's like I kind of started to get depressed because it was like, it's so overwhelming. And then I kind of looked to nature and looked to water. Like I studied bioluminescence, which is, especially in the ocean, many animals are communicating with little pulses of light because there's not the sunlight there. but it was this idea that I would have to go into the darkness to find the light. And I would swim deep, dark in the places in the ocean and find little pulses of light. And I was like, even in darkness, there's light and there's storytelling to be told. And I think I moved away from thinking about carbon and water in terms of these like objects, and kind of moved into this sense of like possibility. And that's where this new project that I'm doing is trying to translate what whales are saying, which has nothing to really directly do with like CO2. Although some people actually look at whales as like carbon sinks and so forth. And I think it's more about that we live in a world where there's 71% ocean, and we're just the minority on the land, and that there are animals swimming in the ocean, and they're still there, that are bigger than any dinosaur that's ever existed. You know, there's the blue whale, which is and they're there and they're communicating, and there's just a world of possibility of connection, and there's a world of possible beauty. And I think it's just kind of finding that light and trying to kind of filter through that and see what that might look like is what really drives me about water.
That's such a nice transition into our, we have a few minutes left. And so with that, looking for the light in all of the darkness, it would be so wonderful if each of the panelists could give one maybe tangible, concrete thing that we could do here today to help ensure that our future is something that we actually want to be a part of. It's the best possible scenario in the situation we have now. And maybe we'll start at the end.
Sure. I think, how can we have some care or affect to something that we don't see, or someone that we haven't met yet, or never, maybe we're not going to see them in our lives, but we should care about their lives and futures, right? As David was saying, because we are really temporal. Like our existence here, even if we are like my grandma, 110 or 100 something that she said she was, it's a speck of time, right? It's nothing. And it's like, how can we care for something that we don't see? And we were talking about prior to this, how can we care of the deep sea? We don't see it. And I am not a marine biologist, right? I'm a social scientist. How can I care of something that I don't understand? And I think we have to move on, like, about worrying to now affectivity, but not only like, oh, I care about them so much and that's it, but affectivity rooted in a political position and an informed position with facts and good data. Thank you.
Wonderful. Mauricio, one solid takeaway, one thing that we can do for a better future.
Geez, I think you explained it all. Maybe to reiterate is to care for this beautiful planet and everything that's in it, and find the beauty in all of it, even in our backyards and in the water and in the air and in the soil, and to make an effort and not think that you have to go too far to find beauty, and to care for it.
I think from a young person perspective, like was mentioned earlier, we are looking for concrete ways to make change, and we are frustrated with the economic systems that seem to intentionally prioritize things that are actively damaging the planet. So I think that so much of this is wrapped up in the economic systems that we exist in, and that does need to change on so many different levels. But I did just read, to bring it back to like very concrete, I'm reading a book by Dr. Ayanna Johnson, that amazing book she just came out with, and I think it's so cool. One thing that she says is that the most effective thing you might do for climate change, more than your biking and your reusable water and all of that amazing stuff, is changing your 401k to not be invested in fossil fuels. And I think things like that are maybe more boring, or maybe more, I don't know, whatever, not exciting, not interesting maybe to some people, are actually very, very impactful. And they are just one reminder that economic systems and these larger things may be very controlling of the reality that we live in, but our one small part in it is something that we should try to manage. And maybe that will give you that little sense of, I just did something, or my money is not going towards the fossil fuel industry. And that might inspire you to then take more steps to better the rest of the planet.
Yeah, it's the million dollar question of what can we do? I always think there are these tangible steps, like, yeah, really are how we, the one thing that probably will have the most impact is what comes out of your wallet. Where do you spend your money? How is your part of this kind of economic system? And that's something that you have clear choices. Every day you're making choices on where that's going. So that's number one. But really it's like kind of just, finding out and learning about different things and finding out really where your superpower is. Like everybody has a superpower, and like everybody's superpower is a little different, so like where is it that your superpower hits? Is it communication? Is it with like, multi-species justice? Is it about like organizing the harbor seals? Like where is it that place in the world that you can have change, and where is it that's bringing you joy? Because you have to find joy in what you're doing. And and I feel with my students too, it's like they're given a world that that is it's like the last thing you want to hear is like, okay, here's this world that's all broken down and damaged, and go have fun with it. Like we're gonna go check out, and and I think it's important to kind of have hope and to inspire and to really also really work with the younger generation to not just give words to say it's we're so excited, but to like try to find ways to really empower the younger generation.
Thank you very much, our panelists and Dr. Enriquez. Hopefully we can find a way to be hopeful and innovative and think about how we are going to do our part, even if it's a small part, to help protect the planet, all the ways that we're thinking about water, and take some action. And thank you very much for coming. We have big thanks to CUNY TV. Huge thanks to everyone in the Futures Initiative, our executive director, Dr. Adashima Oyo, our founder, Dr. Kathy Davidson, and every last one of the Futures Initiative fellows, including Dr. Megan Enriquez, for putting together this incredible conversation on Earth Day. Thank you all.
Thank you for joining us for this special edition of Sustainability Matters. As we've seen, water is more than a resource. It's a vital thread that connects people, ecosystems, and the urgent need for environmental justice. We hope this conversation sparked new ideas and inspired you to think about how your own community values and protects water. In our next episode, we'll turn our attention to biodiversity, exploring how species survival, habitat restoration, and ecological balance are all deeply connected to climate solutions. Please keep the conversation going. Follow us or send us a message on social media. And if you haven't already, download the CUNY TV app to watch this and other episodes anytime. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time on Sustainability Matters.